Emotional expression. It is the I don't want to say the expression is the intercept point. It's not. It's that moment before we want to self-express the inner truth of self, because it's natural to do so. That's why we want to, but we're too afraid to do it. So that moment, that interception point, is right before we think of self-expression. We think of how safe or how dangerous it is. We think in those terms because, well, the world of duality that we live in, but our programming from early childhood, we think in those terms because of that specifically. The lower self has a so in thought of self-expression, when we go into self-protection mode, in the thought of it, when we become afraid because the unresolved past comes in to play its part, and we feel that fear, we think of self-expression that leaves us in a state, it's the end result that we think of what might happen in the end result. So if we think of wholeness and completeness, fulfillment and contentment in terms in that thought of self-expression, which is what happens when we are acknowledged with friends and people who understand us, with empathy. We walk away feeling that. But when we face rejection, we think of how we felt when we were a child, feeling it for the first time, because that was the programming. That's what we revert back to, go back to every single time when in thought of self-expression. And we test before we start trusting people. We don't come out and say our inner truths. That will allow us that contentment, that fulfills self. So my point was, it's the thought specifically in the end result of how we're going to feel in the thought of self-expression controls us. So that must be its intercept point. It's the end result thought. So we think of both, we think of the result, and fear comes in to say, well, they're going to reject you, so protect yourself. And that means don't say anything. But in that, that's what keeps us emptied. And in that, that's what keeps us hungry. Because emptied means longing into a child, longing for the fullness to return. But when that doesn't return and the child starts looking for physical outside distractions, then we find as children the favorite one, and we just keep going back to it in that moment of not being able to feel acknowledged for our inner truths of ourselves as children, the important programming years. So through the rejection model of parenting, we're programmed to calculate heart's thought with a different kind of feminine element, because now there's two feminine elements in which we calculate our heart's thought with in terms of reacting to the environment, the outside self. So if we choose the lower self-dominance, then it's the dark feminine, where we're reacting to one emotion, one dark emotion that infects all of them, all other emotions that brings us life. So it controls the emotional acceptance inside ourselves. The fear does, fear of emotional self, from self-expression. And we live in that program as children because it is unacknowledged in early childhood. So we live by it because it's what we know. Remember, the living computer is a computer. It stores memory. We're born into this world with no knowledge. All we have is the knowledge base in which our experiences allow us. So, if our experience is that of distortion and not real, then that's what we're programmed with. Rejection isn't supposed to be for the child. They're supposed to be acknowledged. That's the acknowledgement model of parenting. Even in its title, without knowing what that means, you already know that you don't. The logic that comes to you in the light in your thought, that comes to you when you hear the acknowledgement model and the rejection model of parenting, you know it makes sense. You know you're one of them. You know there's only two of them. And I say you, but I learned this through me. Everything that I see in myself that I fixed in me, I see in you. And when you start cleansing, repairing, restoring, reprogramming your heart's thought of yourself, then you'll start seeing that same thing, you in other people. Not the person, but the behavior, the reaction. The reactions are pretty much all the same. Our uniqueness is the only thing that's different. We operate from the same living computer. Our function is the same. It's there to translate spirit into physical. So the spirit of self can live in the physical realm and live instead of allow the lower self-dominance to dominate self, dominate higher self, control self, kill self off, and live by the animal instinct to self-protect all our lives instead of the human made to be human being and self-express. Because there's only two of those two. There's only two paths we go down. Self-expression of innermost emotional truth of the self, or the self-protection of the innermost emotional truth of the self. The good and the evil comes from both of those. The animal is one of them. The higher self-spiritual being is the other. There are spiritual elements of light and spiritual elements of darkness from the lower self influencing. Well, whatever is influencing the lower self-dominance, it has its own masculine and feminine elements of its influence. This feminine element is fear. It births feminine, right? Fear into our hearts in the thought of how we're feeling and self-expressing that. So if we let that be the human algorithm, or, if we, as children, we can't help but allow that to become a living program that we react to every single time, no questions asked, because what else is a child of not knowing anything going to do, right? So we are bred into then the lower self-dominance. We calculate thought from one of the two feminine elements, truth and emotion, or fear of truth and emotion. Truth is the life source. Truth is that movement, that gut feeling. We know it's there. It's a feminine, female, spiritual being. God has a wife. That's her. We all have husbands and wives internally. Like that whole bridal chamber, wedding thing. That's what it's all about. The unionship between the three beings, masculine, feminine, and God, who's providing the masculine and feminine. Nobody knows. That's not some of the stuff we're taught. We're taught how to survive the lower self-dominance. So after we become afraid of the natural emotional response, when there was first the inspiration from that, then the aspiration birthed, like the idea birthed as the result, duplicating the birthing process in heaven, but they become actual beings, like our babies become actual beings from us, duplicating each other. They do it in thought, we do it physically. Anyway, my point is, after we become afraid of our emotional responses, the electromagnetic pulse snake makes us afraid of our own emotional selves to self-express. Yet, at the same time, the higher self is saying, no, seek acknowledgement, because that's the spiritual food when we feel acknowledged for our emotional selves as children, and now as adults too. Because that is part of the spirit, it's part of the truth. Human truth is the emotional response, otherwise truth couldn't become the self, and that's the whole point of feeding self-life, of the life sources need to feed us life. It's its whole point, is feeding us the knowledge of truth, and its emotional response to now the knowledge of truth becomes internalized. And after we do that, after accepting that through human will, spiritual fullness enters us. It's a spirit, it's a God. Worship life, buddy. If you worship life, you'll be worshiping God. It's not done in belief system. Belief system destroys knowledge. It stops you from getting the greater knowledge, which that can't stop. You can't stop getting a greater knowledge from the original knowledge. Look at the airplane, its evolution. It started as one knowledge, and that was everything. But we've learned that things get better. It's like understanding the greatest knowledge in the moment. You can then think about that from intellect and wisdom to achieve the greater knowledge even from that. And we do that in everything, not just airplanes. Well, now it's time to learn how to do that with self, because we lost track of that. Humanity did. And my whole point, thought process, the chaos is in thought process. When our hearts are filled with fear, delivers a different speak and influence that delivers then the reaction of a different thought process of the first thought of truth, emotional truth of self, becoming then infected with the memory of fearing, humiliation, rejection, and ridicule. And we bring that into the now. And that's how we're controlled. We control it. When all it takes is knowledge of self, and what that takes is to erase your pain, like the way has been found to do it, and learn how to self-express skillfully. That's all it takes, because the only power it has is making us fear. Like, look how much we fear the devil. All it is an influence and fear of the emotional truth of the self. Erase your pain, get strong with the skills, and you'll be okay. It's not like TV. Demons come, but there are other spiritual influences once we're trapped in the prison of fear. You see? Because then we're looking for outside escapes. And the desperate need as the lower self to survive is the animal. The animal is the lion spoken of in, I think it's Secret Saying 7. We're the animal and the human thing. But if the human consumes the animal, then the human and animal become whatever that becomes in heaven and land. I don't know if Bibles speak. But you understand that animal instinct to survive is the lower self. And become the hungry lion. Look what a lion does when it's hungry or consuming food. And when it's hungry, it's hunting. We hunt the emotional weakness in each other. When it's feeding, you ever see an animal feed? Or I mean a lion feed off its fresh kill? Nothing interrupts its hunger process, its consumption. And that's how we become when we see the weakness in other people. Everybody does it because we believe in this Darwinian God worship. Like, we're treating that as the God's plan, to consume one another instead of what it needs to be, and that's to help one another. But we can't, because we're so terrified of being consumed, because that's the environment. We live in the Darwinian, the strongest survive, the rest of us die off. And it's become this spiritual death thing that we do with each other now. Because I look at you, I see food. You look at me, you see food. For what? Not the physical consumption, but the spiritual one. You need to feel safe with that self-acknowledgement of self, and not the self-acknowledgement of nothing. So we automatic protection because of that. And when we're there, what do we have? We got to survive other ways too. We got to feed. Like, okay, go get money. So now I'm looking at you for money. And now I know how to consume you already because of my low self-worth. I'm so afraid of acknowledging to myself that I feel alone and unacknowledged and worthless because of that. Then I'm going to fight against that because I don't know a different way, which I didn't. And that's how I know this, because I went through all that, found this other way of living, and fuck, buddy. And it's not this fucking Bible-thumping Jesus fucking bullshit worship where they say, yeah, do this, do that, but do the exact opposite of what they tell you to do. There's no direction in that. There's no direction in hypocrisy. And that's what this direction tells you about the lower thought process of heart and the higher thought process of heart. There's two of them. Get rid of the lower self-thought process, but you don't have to forget it and use it for the people who are still turned, because they'll come at you still, but you'll be skillful. The pain will be gone, man. Like, that's huge, right? I don't know how to explain that, but that's fucking huge. And when it's gone, you can become skillful easily. Like, I remember I tried to do this whole fucking life skills thing with still the unresolved pain, And all it did was teach me how to react differently to the pain. God bless those life skills coaches who try to rid me of my pain by doing that, but that doesn't rid you of pain. All you learn how to do is react differently to pain so you don't cause conflict in your relationships, which is also huge, right? So you're managing pain, but that's fucked up just as much because you're just living in pain still. And I had nothing still, but I found this way to erase the emotional pain. It works the same way as The Secret does. It's taken from The Secret. Where you imagine this and allow the feeling of actualizing living in $1 million house or whatever your fucking thing is, right? And developing the intent for that, like that we get that in its deepest level of understanding, but we're not achieving it. Why? Because like everything else relies on self-worth to deliver the fuel when hope disappears, because hope is temporary and that's what we believe in. But if we don't have the cognitive belief that matches with the heart's belief of self and self-worth, then when the hope disappears, because that's just temporary, our faith disappears in ourselves. So there's been a way now to use The Secret's, knowing its agenda, its method of doing things to score you the shit you want, but done so now emotionally, where pain is erased and fucking 90% of your fears are erased because the pain is gone. A lot of you are confused as to how to discipline a child. It's not punishment. Punishment enables the lower self-dominance to self-protect. And all you're enabling is the invitation of the evil spirit influence into influence the dark feminine, to infect wisdom, to turn wisdom into two wisdoms. That's all you're doing by punishing the child. Hitting the child is assault. It's violence. But that tickling method, it's hard to explain, and visualizing it or thinking about it now, some might think that this guy is fucking crazy. Are you kidding? It's not to make enemies or establish the threat of loss as a leverage of parenting. You don't threaten loss in your child's life. If you want the child to be happy in his adult life, his or her adult life, sorry, you teach, you learn, you teach the child to learn, grow, and evolve from his experience. And for that, you have to make it safe, and it can't be rejection-filled. And the child's self-expression, or when you're mad at the kid or embarrassed from the kid, don't react with your lower self-dominance towards the child. Because we're just creating the invitation. Evil can't enter a human being unless through an invitation. He's not born with us. God and life source is born with the human being. Evil spirit influence of fear, fearing loss, and the lust fuel replacement for inspiration, spiritual fuel, replaces the life source element and makes us fear our own emotional structures. That's how it infects us and separates us from our life source, sourcing self with the uniqueness of self. I'm hoping that once you understand these things, you'll become a balanced, self-determined parent. That's the acknowledgement model of parenting. And that's when heart's thought fills mind with, well, what about this reason, that environment, that money, that. You know what, parent, mom, dad, it matters not what the outside brings the child. The outside environment is going to bring the child pain, fear, and terror. That's real. It brings every child. But if that child has the acknowledgement model of parenting, to come home to and self-express freely in it, in a safe environment for that to allow itself to grow from self-expression, because that's what God in us does. It rebirths life, but rejection kills the life off and invites evil to enter the child. I know that that's been a question. If children are born innocent, let's say if children are born innocent, then when does evil enter them? Well, that's when. You know, people have been saying that for a long time. Wait a minute, we're not born evil. And we're not, we know that. Then how the fucking hell does this happen to us? Well, we found out. And this is it, man. This is how. It's complicated. But you know what? Everything's fucking complicated. But the self doesn't have to be complicated, and it's that relationship, self-development, that intent, development, to develop the intent to relate with self again, naturally, as natural. It won't be natural at first. It'll be scary, man. Do your meditations. I swear to you, just do them. Your self-healing meditations. They'll erase fucking 60 to 90% of all your problems. Erase them. Fear will be gone. Pain will be gone. Jesus. I mean, if you do it properly, exactly the way I told you to, because that's the only way it gets through. It is through the heart's thought that the cells are reprogrammed. There's no way to program a living cell unless through the emotional response in our reaction to it. When we're truthful with that response, then the cell is programmed with life. When we self-reject the emotion before we express it, then the cell is programmed with that rejection, the feeling, ridicule, humiliation, and embarrassment for having feeling, emotional feeling. And then we self-reject, say, no, don't feel that. That's self-committing self-suicide, spiritually, without knowing. You know, don't take this into fucking fantasy where you're going to get punished and go to hell. Jesus. It's true with that part. You invite what you think. Because what you think emotionally of self programs the cells. And it's those cells that the subconscious relates with to show the frontal lobe and the experience in the now. Other entities take over in our heart's thought process to get us understanding. And life is supposed to work like that. And it does. So here we are. I was thinking, here we are trying to build robots that look like human beings. Trying to get them more lifelike, and so on and so on and so on. God did that with this, the living computer. So this is that, right? Our bodies is exactly that goal accomplished. Jesus came and taught meditation practice. Relationship building with self and life source practice meditation. That's it. Getting on your knees was symbolic of the first interception of the keys of knowledge. They called the Jewish religion. It's not Jewish. Not the Jewish people. Not the real ones like us. We're loving, caring, sharing, empathy driven, and calculate our heart's thought with the wisdom of the good. This was before Jesus came, but the keys of knowledge teaches to meditate with life source, not to pray to it. Because life source is internal, not external. But the fake God was external, so you had to pray to something external to believe in the only God, the jealous God, and there's no other God but him, or you died, but first were tortured or raped, or both. And they loved that. The leadership loved that and showed everybody what would happen if you defied the church. And when you defied the church, you died. And still there was, but that's not the point. So when when the first Savior came, not Jesus, the first one for each life cycle of human being, showed the keys of knowledge, then that one died, and eventually they tried to retake control of the earth, just like it happened again. Part of the thing was, when they gave everyone the ultimatum, we're the God, fuck you, and if you don't, you have to prove that choice and get on your knees. Man, woman, child, didn't matter. If you were willing to, because that was belief and ritual for that religion, you see? Back then, there were the relationship dynamic between the intelligent animal and the human being was terror, because they were gods. They weren't, they were like us, but smart, and flew in ships, but they, which were called, chariots and shit, like biblical shit, but it was nothing biblical. It was nothing religion. The keys of knowledge, it was a body of knowledge. And is that a Bible? No, it's a body of knowledge to learn how to live life with the life source, in symbiotic relationship with the life source, instead of the parasitical one that's coming for every human being on this planet. So as for praying on your knees, please consider what I said. It's real. It's how it began, and that's how it was changed from the original being relationship building with God, internal, in silence, in meditation. And if they didn't, they would die and then go to hell. And that's how they changed it again after the first Savior came. Not Jesus, remember, there's been 5. I think Jesus was the 5th, wasn't he? I don't know how that works, honestly. There are 2 wisdoms. The other wisdom, the dark wisdom, they used to call this, in the old days, in the early days when they were writing Bibles and shit, the other woman. The woman described in your Bibles is our wisdom. We have 2 of them. One is wisdom of the good, one is the angry person's wisdom. Doesn't sound like much. Wisdom of the good, they both produce results. The results of the good, results of the angry person's wisdom, though. What is anger? It's a self-protection behavior to guard against the potential of the pain we see coming that's not real, but we see it coming. And we see it coming because we have unresolved pain from our past. And when pain is unresolved from the past, then it feels, it's like open and raw. It's not completed. When we complete emotion, when a human being completes emotion, then we move on to the next thing. But if we don't complete the emotional content in the moment, then the emotional programming, the emotional awareness of unresolved left-hanging pain is always lingering. So that's what we're focusing on. That's what a person focuses on. We focus on what's in our hearts. Before we do anything, we interpret the environment. And once we understand the environment, we compare what we know in the environment. Anything outside ourselves is the environment. To our self-worth levels, and then we proceed. That gets complicated. It's hard to understand, but that's how we react in an algorithm or a specific process of one thing happening after the other in terms of us spiritually and how we work spiritually and how everything kicks in when it does. And that's important to know if you're looking to develop self. And what is this personal development other than developing our intent making? And our intent making comes from what? Our wisdom. Our wisdom and intellect joined together, we calculate from heart's thought, its own process, the wisdom of the good. So we project that out to the world. People feel it, feel loved by it. But when we calculate that heart's thought with the wisdom, with the angry person's wisdom, because pain is unresolved, and we naturally have to protect ourselves, we're combating with each other. We're fighting each other. So when that happens, we're not completing emotion, and when that just builds and builds and builds and builds, that creates an emptiness of the natural spiritual wholeness that we're born with. And we feel that emptiness emotionally. When we have emotional deadening like that, we start thinking, fuck, we can't maintain that, understand that emotional awareness for too long, because it's crazy shit, and it hurts, and it rages and feels thought-filled with... Anyway, so we seek distraction from the environment, and that's where addiction comes from. But it's internal first, and addiction is only the result, it's a stem result of the root cause and root problem. The root cause is separation internal with that duality thing in our wisdom. But that's not the root. That's another stem result. The root of that. How does that get created? Well, it's been found that it gets created through the rejection model of parenting. Unbelievable. Even good parents who are good, like, reject their children. And that's what happens as a result of being rejected by parent. Low self-worth develops. Unresolved pain lingers. The other wisdom develops itself, developing then a duality in spiritual nature and duality in behavior. A duality in behavior then, also, behavioral. A duality in how we act, in our persona. One is the higher self, the other one is the lower self. One higher self feels free to self-express, or the lower self is too afraid to self-express. That's the result of the rejection model of being parented. The acknowledgement model of being parented is acknowledging the emotional content in the moment, while at the same time saying yes or no to if there's a request from the child. You can acknowledge the emotional content while saying no at the same time, and that's important. That's the acknowledgement model of parenting. The child wants a cookie, and you say no, and starts crying, says carry on, blah, blah, blah. Take it, hold it, say, I know, I get it. I understand cookies are cool, and they taste good, and acknowledge shit, right? That the child is feeling emotionally, but you still can't have the cookie till after dinner. And who cares after that? If the child freaks, as long as he's not hurting himself or other people, let him freak. That's its self-expression. And if it gets too crazy, put the kid in prison in the other room. That's crazy too. I don't like that. Talking to the child through. Well, I wish I could teach parenting. How to be a dad. I wish I could teach that. Not that I know of, but I know stuff that I picked up along the way, and I like tickling. You know, you can, when a child, this is how I deal with discipline, and it works. You don't get arguments, you don't get freak out sections, you don't get nothing. You don't get no problems from the child when you do this one thing. Okay, so how did I deal with every child, not just my own son, but every single child? Every single child, I don't want to say obeys my request. He doesn't, she doesn't. They look inside themselves, look for reason of my request, and then says yes. Okay, that's important also. If you ask for unrealistic shit, then that's unfair. That's not justice. That's not internal spiritual heart spot justice. And if you want a good kid to grow up, like being reasonable, you must be reasonable as part of that acknowledgement model of parenting. Anyway, so whenever, like with my son, I say, oh, give him that example. When he was old enough to understand stuff, I said, look, I would do that. Look, this is how I'm going to be a dad. When I'm happy with you, this is what I'm going to do. I go, chicka, 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 and start tickling, right? And the kid would love that. And then I say, but look, this is what I'm going to do when you piss me off. And then you start tickling again. And let that be real, and it's real. And that's what you're going to do from now on when the child makes you happy and when he pisses you off. It's the same tickling. But after he pisses you off, and then you stop and talk and say, look, I love having fun with you, and I meet those needs for you, no problem. But I have needs too, and I need you to meet my needs. They're reasonable. And if it's a reasonable need that I need met, then I need you to meet that. And, you know, the kid knows he's in trouble, but he's getting tickled, so everything's okay, and he's open. There's no self-protection. You ignite a self-protection behavior, or a self-protection lower self-animal instinct in the child, he's going to be that. She's going to be that. But if you maintain fairness in your relationship with your child, it's fairness. That's all it is. Okay? Then the child will respond to that. Anyway, but you tell the child, okay, so we both have needs. Yours is fun, and tickle, then remind them of that fun. And I have needs. Mine's just a little bit of discipline. Because you're the father or you're the mother. That's the important part. You establish that. I'm the dad, and this is what I need as your dad. Or I'm the mom, and this is what I need as your mom. So you're the kid. I know what you need as a kid when I'm happy with you, and I know what you need as a kid when I'm angry with you. Same thing, tickling. And the kid's gonna love that. But the thing is, what's established then is the next time the kid acts out in the same way, because he will, she will, you can say, this is what I need, remember? And soon, if not immediately, but eventually, the kid's gonna, in whatever language, tell you to fuck off. He's not playing that game no more. That's what kids do. But then you say, oh, you don't want to meet my need as your dad. I'm sorry. You don't want to meet my need as your father, our father's needs. Okay, then I won't meet your needs as a child, the child's needs. And the child will go, okay, because you won't see it coming. What's coming next? This is the part where you get complete discipline with reason and balance for the rest of the kid's life. It works with every kid, not just mine. Okay, the kid will come back. He's still young, remember. Come back and want to get tickled, okay, for being happy or being in trouble. And then you say, no, you don't meet my needs, then I'm not going to meet yours, because in this house, it's fair or it's nothing. And walk away. See how quickly, how fast they reestablish that mindset of the balance determined self in childhood at 2 years old. Well, whenever your child starts talking, understanding language. Anyway, but that's the establishment of the two wisdoms. Well, we're born with the first one. It's called life. It produces and births the knowledge of truth. That cognitively, so we understand shit. But then this thing called truth, the life source, also provides the emotional response. So cognitively, so then the truth becomes the part of the living self. After we accept the emotional impact, then the knowledge becomes living inside of us. And when we complete the emotional content and do all that's necessary, in which we have a map now, then we get that spiritual fullness, that sense of spiritual fullness. But when we don't, we become emptied and no longer having our emotional needs met, because that's what spiritual fullness does. It meets emotional need. Don't hit a child. Tickling and eliminate. You don't have to hit a child. 1, 2, and because of that tickling technique. 2, you should never hit a child. That's assault. I don't care if you think you have the right in God's heart's thought, he wants you to know, he understands that as assault. That's a darkness in heart's thought thinking, because the fear, I know, a lot of you are just trying to teach your fucking kid, I get it. But you're operating from the wisdom of fear, the wisdom of anger, because you don't want that to happen to your fucking kid. I get it. But that's the angry person's wisdom. It's that. That's the problem. That's an infection in heaven. That dark thought. That dark thought, heart's thought process. Where in heaven, there's no dark thought at all. So what are they afraid of? God says, no, we're not going in with that second wisdom, that other wisdom. We have to cleanse that of ourselves first. And this is the beginning on how to do that. It's like AIDS. I know I've said this 1,000 times already, but no one would go downtown and get a junkie to put his blood into you. That's just stupid, and you wouldn't infect your own body. God will not infect his own realm by inviting it from this one. He gives us all kinds of you have no idea the amount, the chances we've had. And this is, we're drawing down to the last little bit itsy-bitsy chance. So the thing is, this was all known. It was all going to happen. All this ugly shit and evil. Because that's the result thing. The one thing that happens has results. So this is the result of the angry person's wisdom, the other wisdom. Because it starts in every child and through the rejection model of parenting. And sure, there's the committed evil people who don't, who have a different education than we do. You just don't even look at them. Go ahead if you want to, but I promise you, you won't want to one day and just focus on yourself. You might as well just do that now. Evil people, they have a different type of education. Those who follow the evil people, not because they're evil and they're scared because they're threatening them, but because truth speaks to them, but they follow their lies. That's the darkness in heart's thought. That's an education needed, okay, for both the sheeple, I love that one. People who follow blindly, when their guts tell them, their seed, their life source, tell them, no, don't. This is lies. But you do anyway because you're afraid. That's, you aren't evil. You're just a sheeple. Because you're looking for it, not because I'm telling you to. That's the thing, right? Because people, the fearful people aren't looking for this. They're not looking for ways to become stronger. They're very comfortable with what they know as evil, but convince themselves it's something else. That's the darkness part, when you convince yourself that truth doesn't exist. It actually looks like this. That's the darkness that is in the infection. So the spiritual infection can't be allowed in that sense. Two wisdoms, one intellect. Both wisdoms want to join with intellect in our thought, okay, to produce the result, the child. That's what the child is. It's written in your Bibles. Yeah, they want to interact with intellect. Intellect and wisdom of the good, the natural kind, is the Christ consciousness when it's used naturally like the child does, before the conversion, spiritual. Before the two wisdoms are there. One wants to remain with the intellect, the other one wants to infect it. And once it infects it, changes intellect to focus on the anger then. And the end result came, you see? And then calculates heart's thought with self-protection and not heart's thought with self-expression and sharing with one another. And that's supposed to be natural for us, but it's not anymore. It's become